Hello, I'm Kathy Fox Alfano, host of Born TV's Primary 22, Why Should We Vote for You? Today I'm welcoming Geoff Diehl, Republican candidate for governor. Geoff, thank you so much for coming down to Born. We'd really like to get to know you better.
Thanks, Kathy, for having me. And you know what, I've been traveling the state. We did a tour a few months back, the Berkshires to Boston, and Born was part of the travel. So it's great to talk to people every chance I can and to be on local cable access. But I know this is going to reach out beyond that area as well, right?
Yes,
Well,
you can use it everywhere in Massachusetts.
Great.
So tell me, what experiences do you have that we need in a governor?
Yeah, I mean, it's no question, it's one of the hardest jobs in America right now, because with the pandemic, we saw that everybody's rights, the businesses, everything depends on the decisions that a governor makes, not just Massachusetts, but around the country. I mean, I think from the pandemic, we've learned that I think governors have more power sometimes than the president when it comes to making sure that people are protected with their health care, but also making sure those businesses are protected as well. So I'm a small business owner from the town of Whitman, not too far from Born here. And my wife and I own a performing arts school. She runs it. I help out with it. So she and I had met on a blind date in New York City, and she had just done a Broadway show. So she
I'm
had
a
that
theater
in her
person
background.
from get-go.
Is that right?
Oh yes, I've started a couple of community theaters. I love it.
Awesome. Well, you should come to Hanson, because that's where the studio is.
Oh wow.
We have a couple hundred kids each year that she teaches dance and acting and voice, and I help with the productions, but I mostly help with our facility. And we've been growing over 20 years, which is great.
Yeah.
But I also worked as a manufacturer's representative for sign companies, first in Brockton, and then in New Bedford. Poyant Signs, one of the largest in the state, the region, and in the country. So, I had some great success with that sign company regionally, and I ended up running for state representative in 2010. I never thought I was going to be involved in politics at all. I wasn't involved locally. I wasn't involved in anything until 2008, when I joined my finance committee in the town of Whitman.
Okay.
And it was learning what our municipal budget was and finding out that we had a state representative that wasn't exactly doing what people were hoping he would do. That I'm an Eagle Scout. I always believe in leaving the campground better than you found it. So for me, running for office was just trying to make sure that Beacon Hill was aware of some of the better decisions that should be made for our towns. Plus, as a business owner, I felt like the state was treating our small businesses a bit like an ATM and not really factoring what's important to the companies that are trying to grow jobs. So that was 2010, when the sales tax had been increased from 5 to 6.25%. And so I just felt strongly enough to run for office at the time. I ended up winning a long shot race. Nobody expected me to win it. And when I got to Beacon Hill, I was put on the Ways and Means Committee. Now, the Ways and Means Committee is a lot like your local finance committee.
Right.
But the Ways and Means Committee determines the budget for the entire state. And for my time on Ways and Means Committee, I really learned everything about what the state spends its money on. I was able to ask a ton of questions, whether it's transportation or immigration or public safety or just about anything you can think of that Beacon Hill touches or government touches. I was able to get the chance to talk with the leaders, in each of the state agencies and see if we could do a better job in certain areas. And so from that time on the Ways and Means Committee, I really was proud to learn a lot about like I said, things that were important. And one of the things we found out was in 2013, Deval Patrick had just instituted an indexing of our gas tax to go up automatically every year without a vote. And I knew that from discussions with transportation that we really had the revenue already to handle transportation. It was just being misspent. And in fact, a lot of it was going to the MBTA, and yet they continue to have issues because they don't put the money where it's supposed to go, and that's a discussion for another day.
Right.
But I guess my point is this, and I'll try to wrap it up, and is that I've got great experience both in the private sector and on Beacon Hill, and I also, in 2018, I ran against Elizabeth Warren for the U.S. Senate race. I had a chance to go around the state and talk to people everywhere regionally about what's important. So whether it's telecommunications infrastructure needs out in Western Mass so that businesses can be attracted to go out there. Maybe East-West Rail to allow people to commute back and forth across the state more effectively without the traffic. Or whether it's the fishing issues that affect down in New Bedford or right here along our coastline.
Right.
I mean, Plymouth has done a great job in this region increasing the dock space for the lobstermen and the fishing boats. I think there's other places we could invest in up and down the coast to help our fishermen. So I've had a great chance just from campaigning in 2018 to learn a lot about what the people of Massachusetts are looking for when it comes to helping them out. And that's what I think the governor's job is all about, is just making sure that you're listening to the needs of the people, whether it's education, whether it's, again, businesses and what they need, and making sure you find that middle ground so that everybody can succeed.
I know you wanted to talk about vaccine mandates. Tell us your position on that.
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing, Kathy. The pandemic, obviously, for the first 15 days, we all did our part to try to make sure that we got an understanding and lockdown and all that. But at some point, it became clear, especially further along, that the vaccines weren't necessarily providing the protection they were supposed to. And there was a lot of frontline workers, police officers, firefighters, nurses, who had served during the pandemic. My running mate, Leah Cole Allen, is a former nurse. She was also a former state representative. That's how I got to know her first. She left the legislature to become a nurse.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Ended up having 2 children. She was pregnant with her second child during the pandemic. She was working on a COVID ward. Okay. And she, when she started nursing, the vaccines came out. She didn't want the vaccine because she was nervous about the effect on the child. So she refused the vaccine and was fired as a nurse. And her story is not, unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Out in Worcester at UMass Memorial Hospital, 200 nurses were fired because they felt that the vaccine wasn't necessarily the best match for their medical background or their medical history. And so again, whether it's having underlying issues that affected, that the vaccine might have aggravated, or that they maybe developed natural immunity, like a police officer who had already caught COVID and now has the natural immunity, I just felt that government should not be mandating the vaccine. Of course, I'm not anti-vaccine. I actually was vaccinated myself, but I think that government really overstepped when they tried to basically force a healthcare choice on people. I think that should never be the case. And so what I want to do on day one is offer anybody who works for state government, any job that I can control. On day one, I will hire them back. And on day two, I am going to give the pink slip to anybody in the administration that felt that suspending somebody's civil rights on their healthcare choices was the good idea. That was wrong to me.
Do the mandates still exist?
No, the emergency order for for Massachusetts was pulled by Governor Baker in the summer of 2021. Okay. Unfortunately, there are federal mandates that are also allowing private businesses like hospitals to fire people if they don't get the vaccine. And in Boston, for example, we've had firefighters and police who were subject to the vaccine mandates. In fact, Mayor Wu actually tried to institute vaccine passports at one point, in which case, a lot of those restaurants that barely survived in Boston through the pandemic, 40% didn't make it. They made it through outdoor dining, and now she's taxing them for outdoor dining. But on top of that, she wanted them to be the enforcers of vaccine passports. I mean, very difficult for those restaurants to have to tell their customers, you can't come in. I mean, it's tough. So that was a position I don't think they should be put in as well.
I understand you want to improve our education system. That's wonderful. How are you going to go about that?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. When I was serving in Whitman on the finance committee, I was the liaison to the regional high school, the regional school district. And what we were doing at the time, Whitman-Hanson had just built the brand new high school, which became the model for the rest of the state. But I really became much more aware, and I have 2 daughters. Now one is 20 and one is 16.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but during the pandemic, one was a senior in high school and the other one was in middle school.
That's tough.
And we saw directly how the pandemic really put them behind. That remote learning was very difficult for the state to administer. They really were unprepared in 2020. A lot of private schools quickly jumped on Zoom and were able to do classes, but public schools were reluctant, and then teachers were reluctant, or the teachers union was reluctant to bring classes back in 2021, so they were still remote 3 days a week and in school 2 days a week. My wife and I actually used our performing arts school, the big dance studios, as learning pods.
Yes, yeah.
So that kids could come in with the laptops, because their parents were starting to go back to work, thankfully. And they would come in and we would provide the internet access and help them get online. Well, the problem was we had kids from all different school districts, and from Quincy down to Hingham and Whitman-Hanson and Pembroke. So we saw that the platforms were different based on school districts, the programs were different based on the platform, and the teachers' capabilities were different based on their comfort with technology.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you've got kids with masks on, 6 hours a day sitting in front of a computer, and they're they're going nuts. I mean, we had them spaced apart, and we provided recreational areas and places for lunch that were spaced apart. But for them, they also didn't just lose on education, they lost on social interaction, these young kids. So I know that we need to make some improvements there. But the other thing too is, a lot of the curriculum that parents started to see coming through there was kind of questionable. They weren't really happy that there was content specific to sexual preference in some of the curriculum, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. So, that's something that I want to give parents more of a voice of. And parents have been trying to go to school board meetings over the last year, but a lot of times these school boards across Massachusetts are reluctant to let parents have a voice. Yeah, it's very surprising. There was a governor's race in Virginia about a year or so ago, and one of the candidates, I think it was Northam, it was McAuliffe, was running against Glenn Youngkin. Youngkin won.
Right.
McAuliffe made a statement during that campaign saying parents should not have a say in school curriculum. And I remember here in Massachusetts, the Mass Association of School Committees actually retweeted that, saying they affirmed that thought. And to me, that's the opposite. Parents should have as much of a say during those school board meetings as anybody else. They know, a lot of them are very savvy, a lot of them homeschool. In fact, we've seen almost a doubling of homeschooling in the last 2 years, and we've seen an increase in double digits of kids moving from public school into private schools. So I want to make sure that public schools are teaching the foundations, including we need to add more financial literacy, but at the same time I don't think that politics should be creeping in and sort of becoming an indoctrination of kids. And the only other thing I do want to say too is that vocational education opportunities. I think a lot of people know that there's a waiting list right now to get into those vocational schools. And right now only about 25% of American kids after high school go on to a 4-year college. So
really, that's all?
75% or go to the military or into a trade or work for a small business. And
is that true here in Massachusetts?
It's roughly the same.
Really?
And so what ends up happening is, there's a bigger demand now for vocational schools than ever. We're seeing kids that are, getting right into the workforce, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. They're making within 4 or 5 years out of high school, 100,000 plus. They're making more than somebody who maybe went on to a 4 years degree, is in debt, and then had to go get their MBA on top of that. These kids are coming out, they're working, they're running their own business, they become, like an MBA person themselves. They know how to do their accounting, they know how to do HR and hiring, all that stuff. So, I think that those vocational opportunities are critical for the growth of our state, and we're going to have a lot of new technology related jobs where we want those people with skill in the skilled labor force to be out there. Vehicles are going to be electric at some point. A lot of these warehouses that are being built have automated technology in there that we could use a skilled labor force to manage and maintain. So I think there's great opportunities for the future. We just have to make sure that the alignment from the curriculum into the workforce is better.
Great. Can we just go back to what would you have done differently during the pandemic with schools?
Yeah, so I think one of the things too is that kids were left with masks on for way into last year, and I think we knew they were the least vulnerable, and I think that we could have definitely gotten the mask mandate off of them sooner. I think it certainly impinged on their ability, especially the young kids again, to interact with teachers, especially when you're learning the language at an early age. You need to have that face-to-face to get the cues. But on top of it, my daughter, this is not related to the pandemic, actually. My daughter last year had to watch a video in order to play a sport, and the video was called Implicit Bias, and she was basically told that because she's white, she has an advantage over other minorities on the athletic field and in the classroom. And I just thought that was really wrong, that in order to play a sport, first of all, she had to watch that video. Secondly, she had to sign sort of an acknowledgement of that white privilege that she benefits from. That's the sort of concept that people say, is that there's white privilege. I just feel like we as parents are doing our best to try to get racism out of the vernacular, and here schools are just coming in and saying, no, you are as a young kid, you're racist, you have to accept it, and you're going to benefit from this stuff, and you have to acknowledge that. So there was a lot of pushback on that, and they stopped making that a requirement. But that was something that, again, I think we want to make sure that parents have more of a say in making sure that schools, if they're going to choose going down that path, they actually weigh in with parents about why they think that's necessary. Because bias can go both ways. It's a complex issue, and I think that video pretty much tried to oversimplify a very complex issue. But again, with the pandemic, it's very difficult to say exactly how we should have done things better. I think being more prepared for remote learning is one thing. And I'm going to say two silver linings from the pandemic when it comes to remote learning. One is in Whitman-Hanson, for example, we don't really have the funding to have more than one teacher for a foreign language. We would love to have maybe 2 or 3. What we could do potentially, I think, for the future is use remote learning for kids who might want to learn another sort of exotic language,
Chinese
Russian or
something.
Chinese, exactly.
Right.
Go on to an online remote course and get that learning done that way. I think those and so related to that, one of the opportunities I think in the workforce for us now, and I had some congestion coming down here on Route 3, right? In the summer, it's always tough. If commuting is difficult for people, like Boston right now is very expensive, it's overcrowded, the traffic is horrendous. With being able to work remotely because of the technology of Zoom and all that, I think we have an opportunity to move some of our workforce beyond our typical cities and out into suburban areas where they can stay there, work there, and not necessarily put the demand on our transportation system. So there's some silver linings from the pandemic too.
I know you're concerned about election integrity.
Yeah.
Have you seen evidence of fraud here in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so Kathy, I know it's funny. Back in 2012, I actually filed an amendment to the state budget that year to require showing ID to vote. And now, fast forward to just this year, the legislature passed a bill that gives people who are here illegally the ability to get a driver's license. And one of the reasons that Governor Baker actually vetoed that legislation was, and they overrode him, so it is law. And now there's a ballot question to try to repeal that, by the way. People can go to fairandsecurema.com if they want to learn more about what's going on in the issues. But I mention it specifically because in 2020, the state legislature created a law that if you get a Massachusetts driver's license, you're automatically enrolled unless you opt out to vote. So what's happening is you potentially have people who are not U.S. citizens being put on the voter roll, and so that's an issue for me. But when people say, where's the evidence of voter fraud, I can tell you there was a sitting state representative, I'll leave his name out just for, just for out of respect for the office, but there was a state representative, and if people want to Google this, who was incarcerated for harvesting absentee ballots in apartment buildings that he owned. He would file for absentee ballots, they would come, and then he filled them out for himself. He ended up getting caught and going to prison for it. It happens. There's evidence. It's just that unfortunately people want to turn a blind eye to it. I think people just want to make sure that one person, one vote, is one of the rights we have always expected here as citizens in our country and in Massachusetts. And I want to make sure that somebody is who they say they are when they go to vote. I think it's important to make sure that that election integrity is secure. If it's not, nothing else matters, because quite honestly, if you can make elections go one way or the other, you control all policy.
What can you do to ensure that elections are fair and open to everybody?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think the showing ID to vote is a pretty simple thing. The fact is most of us can get an ID for just about anything right now. If you get SNAP benefits or EBT benefits, you're issued a state card. So just show some sort of ID that makes sure that you are who you say you are. I think that's all people are asking for. But yeah, I mean, people were talking about the, obviously in 2016, people said that Russia colluded with the Trump administration or Trump campaign, and we found out that was, Hillary Clinton had this Steele dossier that was given to the FBI, and they used that to wiretap. And now we're, in 2020, we've seen concerns where 5 states stopped counting ballots at 10 o'clock at night, and that's not typical. So we've seen in the last just 2 federal election cycles some strange different types of developments when it comes to voting, and I think people just want to make sure that their vote is on the up and up. If they feel like their vote doesn't count, then who wants to get out there and exercise their right for democracy? So that's all.
Do you think that Donald Trump lost the last election?
Well, here's the thing. When you talk about, he's claimed it's been rigged, and I feel very similarly that in 2016, like I said, there was an effort to make it seem like he had colluded, and he ended up having to fight that perception for the entire 4 years he was in office. And it felt like the media spent an inordinate amount of time trying to say that he was an illegitimate president, that the Supreme Court nominees that he nominated, Ed Markey, for example, our U.S. Senator, has said that that's an illegitimate court because of those appointees. That whole 2016 collusion was put to rest, and now 2020, again, there is some states looking into the fact that mail-in ballots were out there and that there were drop boxes that did not have any security, so there was no chain of custody from when a ballot was put in and who took it out and who counted it. That movie 2000 Mules kind of talked about how there was a lot of ballots being stuffed into these these boxes that weren't secured, like I said. So, and even Wisconsin has now said that those drop boxes, their Supreme Court has said that they're not going to allow that for the future. So there's concerns, like I said, and my feeling was rigging against a president isn't just at the ballot box. It is trying to make him out to be an illegitimate president by all members of the media. Even fellow Republicans were trying to bring him down. And the reason I think is because he came along and was a big change agent that was actually trying to work for the people of America instead of just sort of the powers that be, the go along to get along group that always wants to control everybody. And I think that's what's really frustrating right now, is that there's this overall feeling that it's not Republican and Democrat anymore. It's just big government against we the people. And I think we the people are looking to have a little bit of breathing room and a little more freedom, especially after the pandemic.
Do you know Donald Trump? Like, have you sat and chatted with him?
Sure. No, I've
okay.
met Donald Trump. We've talked on the phone. It's interesting. Like I mentioned back in 2010 when I ran for office the first time, my wife and I, we'd never been involved in politics before. Scott Brown had run for U.S. Senate,
Right.
and we were in the bathroom brushing our teeth before we went to bed, and we kind of looked at each other and laughed and said, "Can you imagine if we said we knew a U.S. senator?" Right? And he ended up winning, and so now we knew him, right? And then Charlie Baker, we supported him in 2010, and he didn't win, but in 14 and in 18. But in 14, when he won, we kind of laughed at each other and said, "Hey, we know a governor, right?"
Yeah.
Again, for us, we were just sort of regular folks that trying to do our best with the two jobs we have and the two kids we were trying to raise, and then to meet the president years later, and then obviously run for U.S. Senate and then run for governor. I still look at my wife in the bathroom and laugh and say, "Can you believe we're running for governor of Massachusetts?" But
somebody has to.
But that's the thing. I think it's time for people to come out of the woodwork and run for office at all levels, whether it's at the local level, whether it's for state representative or state senate. We need good people that understand the issues that face working folks every day and get into office, because too many times there's career politicians that are up on Beacon Hill that forget how important it is for us to save the money we can. Right now, the state has collected over $5 billion in unexpected tax revenue. We have overtaxed people to the tune of $5 billion, and the legislature did not, they were given the opportunity, and on the last day of session refused to pass any relief back to the taxpayers. Luckily, there was a 1985 law that was put into place, or in 86, that triggered a return of about $3 billion back to the people, which we'll see soon. But it shouldn't take something like that. It should take the legislature listening to people and saying, we have all the revenue we need right now to run things. We have all this excess revenue. People right now are really hurting with the food cost increases.
Right.
The cost of gas right now is still high. Inflation is ticking up. Home mortgages are going up. Do us a favor and give us some of our money back, and they refuse to do so. So that's the last thing I guess I should say, is that, for me, running as a Republican, it's a supermajority of Democrats in the House and Senate. So they tend to, think one way when it comes to taxing and spending. You need a Republican in there, and we've had one for 24 of the last 32 years, to every once in a while say, hey folks, we need to actually think about the people here and take a more business approach to this thing. If the small businesses are succeeding, if the people are able to afford things and spend more, it's going to overall generate more revenue for our state to provide the services that we're supposed to provide. And so that's why I think that we get that balance here in Massachusetts that people don't always think about. But we do get those Republican governors as a balance to the Democratic legislature.
Well, I was just going to ask you that. I said sometimes I think that Massachusetts is so Democratic that we vote for a Republican just to make it fair. Obviously, we've voted for fiscally conservative, socially moderate Republicans for years, like Weld, Romney, Cellucci, Baker. Where do you see yourself fitting in with that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny. They try to, I think, pigeonhole people on different sides of the spectrum. I was formerly a Democrat in 2008 when I decided that I no longer could really be in the Democratic Party. When Barack Obama said he wanted to see redistribution of wealth, I just did not feel that was the right policy. I feel like, everybody's given an equal opportunity in this world. You don't always get equal outcomes, but everybody has the opportunity to succeed. And I think we've gotten, really far over the years in trying to level that playing field for everybody. So for me, that was sort of the bridge too far. I registered as Republican and ended up again a couple years later running for the state legislature and winning. So for me, I'm more of a pragmatic person who ran on fiscal issues back in 2010. I just want to protect people's civil liberties and rights, and at the same time, I want to make sure that everybody has protections for their healthcare choices, and they also have the protections if they want to open and run a small business, that they can do that without government getting in there and putting too much red tape in them. So I don't know where that falls on the spectrum, but a pragmatic Republican who wants to see our state be successful and grow. We are one of the greatest states in the country. People forget about this with the national news getting so depressing all the time. We have world-class hospitals, we have world-class colleges, we have skiing in the West, we have beaches in the East, we have great agriculture, the fishing industry, one of the most traditional. We feed the world out of New Bedford. It's the most valuable fishing port in the country. We have just about anything and everything that any other state could offer. We just need to make sure that we manage it correctly, and I'm just hoping that my time serving in the legislature, mixed with my experience in the private sector and success I've had there, is what people are looking for in this election cycle.
Can I quickly ask you, what can you do to ensure that the new Cape Cod bridges, both of which are in Bourne, are designed and constructed with the least amount of daily interference in our lives? How involved will you be with this massive undertaking, and can you ensure it can get done in a timely manner?
Look, first of all, generally speaking, government, the old joke is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. So people think the government doesn't do things. The government has been able to do a lot of really good things, like accelerated bridge construction. We've had that in Massachusetts. In fact, right now, where I live in Whitman, in Weymouth, right nearby, there's a bridge that's about to be finalized or finished. The project's been going on for a bit. The state is able to, there's unique construction ways where they can make part of it passable while you're still working on the bridge or whatever. But the other good news is we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, so we've got a federal partner that's going to have the fiscal resources to make sure this happens. But believe me, I know how valuable the Cape is, not just for tourism, but in general. I mean, in Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, I've been out there as well. We need to make sure that we keep these lanes onto the mainland, and especially when the ferry service right now is having its own issues. We've got to make sure that the bridges are expedited and done in a way that gives us a long-term quality solution that doesn't hinder during construction the access. So I will be working on it on a regular daily basis. Great. I promise you.
Okay, very quickly, thank you very much, but tell me, Geoff, why should we vote for you?
Yeah, so again, and by the way, if they want to learn more, people can go to my website, geoffdiehl.com, GeoffDiehl.com. My mom decided to spell my name a little differently, so Geoff is with a G, GeoffDiehl.com. That's got a website where you can volunteer, but you can also watch videos and learn my platform, so it's all right there. But what I would just say to the listeners and audience who's watching this is that, again, I care deeply about Massachusetts. Because I chose to come here. My wife grew up, she's a native from Whitman. She and I met years ago. I knew when I met her that I wanted to marry her. 5 months after we met, we got engaged, and we were married less than a year later. So we were a love story, and when I came to Massachusetts with her, it was a love story all over again. I again got involved in my local town because I cared so much about it. My two daughters, they love this state. They've thrived in it, and what we want to do is, I guess I'm sort of selfish. I want my kids to stay here in Massachusetts or go to college and come back, whatever they want to do, and I want my grandkids to be with me. So I want to make this state affordable for the future for everybody. Great. The American dream should never be out of reach, and we can make sure Massachusetts stays affordable. Thank you, Geoff. Best of luck in the upcoming primary, which is September 6th. Yes, the day after Labor Day. You've been watching this on Bourne TV. This and my other interviews can be seen on BourneTV.com. Please watch, meet all the candidates, and then you be the judge. Get out and vote.